Warning: this story destroyed a marriage, friendships, and lives. If you're not ready for the truth, don't keep watching. Let's begin. Throwaway, because obviously. So yeah, I, 34F, cheated on my husband, 36M. And before anyone jumps down my throat, I'm not here for moral lessons. I'm here because things blew up way faster and messier than I expected. And now he's asking for space, while also sending me 3-paragraph texts at 2 a.m. about trust and betrayal and whatever. I need outside perspective, not a sermon. We've been married 8 years, no kids, 2 dogs, mortgage, the whole boring adult starter pack. From the outside, we were fine. That's actually important. Everyone keeps acting like there must have been screaming fights or dead bedrooms or some dramatic warning signs. There weren't. We functioned. We hosted dinners. We laughed at the same dumb shows. We had sex. Not bad sex, just very scheduled, very, okay, it's Sunday. The first real crack, if I'm being honest, was about 6 months ago when he started this whole self-improvement kick. Gym at 5 a.m., protein shakes, podcasts about discipline. Suddenly, everything I did was inefficient. The dishwasher loading was wrong. My job was comfortable but stagnant. He didn't say it mean, just constantly, like feedback I never asked for. Around the same time, I started staying late at work. Not because I had to, because I wanted quiet, no questions, no sighs when I sat on the couch scrolling my phone. That's when the lying started, technically, even before the cheating. Big project, client emergency, harmless stuff, or so I told myself. I didn't wake up one day planning to blow up my marriage. I just woke up irritated all the time, and bored, and weirdly resentful that he still thought everything was fine. That's probably when it became not fine anymore. Here's where I'll admit something that makes me sound worse than I already do. I liked lying. Not in a cartoon villain way, but in this quiet, practical way. Lying smoothed things over. Lying kept the peace. Lying meant I didn't have to explain feelings I didn't fully understand myself. Enter Mark. Of course, his name is Mark. He's 41, divorced, works in IT for a company that technically partners with mine, which means we'd see each other during these stupid cross-team meetings that everyone pretends are useful. He wasn't even that attractive at first, kind of soft around the middle, receding hairline, but he paid attention in a way that felt intentional. He remembered things. Compliments that weren't about efficiency or optimization or whatever buzzword my husband was obsessed with that week. The first unexpected thing? I ran into Mark at the grocery store, completely unplanned. I was in sweatpants, hair greasy, holding a frozen pizza like a failure, and he smiled like he'd just won something. We talked for 10 minutes by the yogurt, and I lied automatically when he asked if I had kids. I said no, but hesitated just long enough that it sounded complicated instead of married. After that, things escalated stupid fast. Texts turned into daily texts. Daily texts turned into lunch meetings. Lunch meetings turned into me deleting entire threads, and then double-checking they were gone. Because paranoia is the real relationship killer, apparently. Meanwhile, my husband noticed things before he noticed things. I was on my phone more. I laughed at texts and said, just work, without thinking. I started wearing makeup on random Tuesdays. I picked fights about nothing, dishes, his breathing, the way he said my name like it was a bullet point. Here's the part I keep rewriting in my head. I wasn't trying to get caught, but I also wasn't being careful. Some petty part of me liked that I was getting away with something right under his nose, like I was finally doing something just for me. That part of me is an idiot, in case that wasn't clear yet. The actual cheating part didn't happen the way people expect. which I think is why I still argue with myself about whether it counts as early as it did. The first time Mark and I crossed a line, it wasn't some dramatic hotel room thing. It was my car, in the parking garage under my office, middle of the day. I told my husband I was grabbing lunch with a coworker named Sarah. There is no Sarah. There has never been a Sarah. Unexpected event number 1. My car wouldn't start afterward. Just dead. Battery completely gone. So there I was, sitting there adjusting my shirt, heart racing, and Mark is suddenly useless, pacing around saying things like, "Wow, that's crazy timing." I almost laughed. Instead, I called roadside assistance and then, without thinking, called my husband. I lied so smoothly, it scared me. "Car died at work. Can you pick me up?" No mention of Mark. No mention of why my hair was messed up or why I suddenly cared very deeply about the angle of my seatbelt. He came. He was annoyed but polite. Mark waved from a distance like a harmless coworker. My husband nodded at him like a decent human being. That image still messes with me more than the sex. After that, I should have stopped. That would have been the smart, responsible, morally acceptable thing to do. Instead, I took it as a sign I could handle this. I got bolder. I stopped deleting messages right away. I changed Mark's name in my phone to IT Help Desk because I thought that was clever. It wasn't. The second unexpected thing was my husband starting to act different, not angry, not suspicious, just quieter. He asked fewer questions. He stopped correcting me. At first I thought, great, he's finally backing off. Turns out he was paying attention. And I kept lying about where I was, about who I was with, about why I smelled like someone else's cologne and blamed it on the office. I told myself he'd never notice. I was wrong. The discovery wasn't cinematic. No walking in on us. No lipstick on a collar. It was worse, honestly. Quiet and methodical, which is very on brand for him. I found out how he found out later, but the first sign something was wrong was a Tuesday night when he didn't kiss me hello. He just said, "Did you have a good day?" in this flat voice, like he was testing audio levels. I said yes. I always said yes. Lie reflexively engaged. What I didn't know was that 2 days earlier, he'd tried to use our shared iPad to look up a recipe. I'd forgotten that thing even existed. My messages had synced, not the explicit ones, thank God, but enough. Enough, can't wait to see you. Enough, lunch again. Enough hearts that were definitely not work-related. Unexpected event number 3. Instead of confronting me immediately, he did research. I'm not joking. He went through phone records, compared timestamps, checked my location history because apparently Apple just hands that stuff out if you know where to look. He noticed the pattern of my late meetings lining up perfectly with Mark's office schedule. I came home that night and he'd cooked. Real cooked. Not frozen pizza or meal prep. Candles, even. I thought, this is embarrassing to admit, that maybe he was planning something romantic, like a reset. I almost felt guilty enough to confess right then, almost. We ate. He asked about work. I lied. Again. He nodded. Then very calmly he asked, "Who's Mark?" I laughed, instinctively. Loud, fake, too fast. "Mark who?" That's when he slid my phone across the table, face up, messages open. Not yelling, not crying, just looking at me like he was trying to understand a language he didn't speak anymore. I did what I do best. I minimized. It's not what you think. Classic, I know. I said it was emotional. I said nothing physical had happened. Both lies. I even said, "You're invading my privacy," which looking back is almost impressive in its audacity. He didn't raise his voice once. He just said, "I know," and that somehow made everything worse. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a fight I could talk my way out of. The confrontation didn't end at the table. That was just the opening round. He stood up, took his plate to the sink, rinsed it like his brain was still clinging to routine, and then said, "Tell me everything. Start now. Don't edit." His voice cracked on don't, which annoyed me in this irrational way, like how dare he get emotional first. So I lied, obviously. I told him Mark was just a flirt. I told him it was attention, not sex. I said I'd been feeling ignored and this just happened. I even threw in, "You've been distant lately," which was rich coming from someone who'd been literally parking in garages to hook up. Unexpected event number 4. He pulled out a printed timeline. Printed. Dates. Times. My late meetings. My girls' nights. Phone pings lining up with Mark's number. He'd highlighted things, color-coded them. I didn't even know whether to be scared or impressed. I pivoted fast. Denial wasn't going to work, so I went with selective honesty. I admitted it had been physical once, then a few times. I cried. Real tears this time. I said I was confused. I said I still loved him. I said Mark didn't mean anything, which wasn't true but felt strategically correct. He finally raised his voice then, just once. "Did you bring him into our life?" "Not our bed, not our home. Life." That word landed hard. I snapped back, because apparently I'm allergic to accountability. I said he was being dramatic. I said marriages survive worse. I said if he hadn't been so critical lately, maybe I wouldn't have looked elsewhere. I watched his face change when I said that, like something folded in on itself and locked. That's when he said, very quietly, "I don't know who you are." And instead of feeling ashamed, my first thought was, good. Then maybe this will end faster. That thought still makes me feel like a terrible person. But it was there, loud and clear. The next few days were a blur, but not in the dramatic, crying on the floor way people describe. It was more like emotional whiplash mixed with awkward domestic logistics. He didn't kick me out. That surprised me. Instead, he moved into the guest room with one pillow and his phone charger, like he was going camping indefinitely. We passed each other in the hallway like coworkers who'd had HR called on them. Polite, stiff, too careful. Here's the thing that doesn't make me look good at all. I was irritated by his sadness. He walked around quiet, eyes red, moving slower, and instead of empathy, I felt defensive. Like his pain was an accusation just existing in the room. I caught myself thinking, okay, I said I was sorry. How long are you going to milk this? Which, yes, I know how that sounds. Unexpected event number 5. Mark didn't disappear. I'd assumed once things blew up, he'd back off, or at least take the hint. Instead, he texted me the morning after the confrontation. "Everything okay? You seemed off yesterday." No apology, no guilt, just concern, like we were still playing house in secret. I told my husband I blocked Mark. I did not block Mark. I muted him. Big difference. I justified it by telling myself I needed closure, answers, something. Mostly, I needed someone who wasn't looking at me like I'd just shattered their understanding of reality. My husband, meanwhile, started asking questions that weren't about what happened, but why. Why I lied so easily. Why I didn't come to him first. Why I kept going even after close calls. Those questions annoyed me more than the accusations because I didn't have clean answers. So I gave him messy ones, half-truths dressed up as self-reflection. He told me he felt stupid. That hurt more than when he said he felt angry. He said he'd started doubting his memory, replaying conversations, wondering if he'd imagined our closeness. I rolled my eyes at one point, literally rolled my eyes, and he saw it. That was the first time he stopped talking mid-sentence and just shut down. Later that night, I overheard him on the phone with his brother. He didn't say my name, just said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." And for the first time, it occurred to me that this wasn't about winning an argument or surviving a scandal. This was about whether he was going to choose a future that didn't include me at all. Things escalated in a way I didn't anticipate at all. He stopped trying. No more questions, no more late-night talks, no, we need to figure this out. He became eerily calm, like someone who'd already made a decision but hadn't told me yet. He started going for long walks without his phone. He cooked only for himself. He labeled food in the fridge with his name like we were roommates who hated each other. That scared me more than yelling would have. Unexpected event number 6. He asked for my passwords. Not demanded. Asked. Email, phone, social media, everything. Framed it as a way to rebuild trust. I laughed, because that's my reflex when I'm cornered, and said, "That feels controlling." He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "Okay," and walked away. That night I changed my passwords. All of them. I told myself it was about privacy and autonomy. In reality, I still wasn't done lying, and some part of me wanted to keep that option open. He noticed. Of course he did. The next morning he said, "I asked because I wanted to see if you'd choose transparency. You didn't." No anger, just a statement, like he was checking boxes on a clipboard. Meanwhile, Mark decided to go rogue. He showed up at my office. No warning, just appeared by my desk with coffee like he was being romantic instead of wildly inappropriate. My stomach dropped. A coworker raised an eyebrow. HR vibes everywhere. I told Mark, quietly but sharply, to leave. He looked confused, almost offended, like I was being unreasonable. That should have been my wake-up call. But instead I went home and complained to my husband about how stressful work has been lately. I hated myself even as the lie came out, but not enough to stop. That night, my husband told me he'd scheduled an individual therapy appointment. Not couples, individual. He said, "I need to understand why I stayed blind for so long." That sentence hit me in a place I didn't expect. Not because it was sad, because it didn't include me. I wasn't part of the problem he was trying to solve anymore. I was just a factor. And suddenly, the house felt very temporary. The therapy thing flipped a switch in him, but not the way movies pretend it does. He didn't come back enlightened or eager to talk. He came back resolved. Unexpected event number 7. He asked for a post-nuptial agreement, not as an ultimatum, as information. He said it the way you'd ask about changing insurance providers, calm, detached. I snapped that he was being dramatic again, and he replied, "No, I'm being prepared." That shut me up. I tried a new tactic after that, sudden honesty, or at least my version of it. I confessed that it had been physical more than I'd admitted. I said I felt lonely. I said I didn't know how to stop once it started. All technically true, just very carefully framed to make me sound lost instead of selfish. He listened, took notes, literal notes, then asked, "Do you still want to be married to me?" No speech, no pleading, just the question. I hesitated. That was my mistake. I said yes, eventually, but the pause was loud. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He said, "Okay," like he'd expected that answer but wasn't relying on it. That night, Mark texted again. I told him things were complicated. He replied, "They always are." Then he sent a selfie from a bar I'd never been to, with a woman's hand on his arm that definitely wasn't mine. That stung in a way I didn't anticipate. Turns out being replaceable hurts, even when you're actively ruining your own marriage. I didn't tell my husband about that message. I told myself it was irrelevant. But I started watching my husband more closely after that. How he moved through the house, how he no longer looked at me for reassurance, how he'd already begun separating his life from mine in small, practical ways. And here's the ugly truth I don't like admitting. Once I realized I was no longer the center of his emotional world, I wanted that spot back, not because I deserved it, because I missed the power of it. That's when I started panicking. My panic manifested as what I can only describe as a rebrand. Overnight, I became the version of myself I thought he might still choose. I woke up early with him. I made breakfast. I asked about his therapy session without sounding defensive. I practiced in the shower. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I even suggested couples counseling like it was my idea and not a last-ditch PR move. Unexpected event number 8. He agreed, immediately, which somehow made it worse. No resistance, no hope attached, just, sure, I think that would be useful. Useful, like a spreadsheet. We went to one session. One. I cried. A lot. I talked about insecurity, fear of aging, feeling unseen. All real feelings, but not the full picture. I conveniently skipped over how good it felt to be wanted by someone new. I skipped how often I chose Mark over my marriage. The therapist nodded sympathetically at me and then turned to my husband. He said, "I feel like I'm grieving someone who's still alive." That sucked the air out of the room. On the drive home, I snapped at him for performing sadness in therapy. He pulled over, actually pulled the car over. That's never happened in our entire relationship. He looked at me and said, "You don't get to police how I hurt." Then he drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, I did something impulsive and deeply stupid. I messaged Mark, not to flirt, to feel chosen. I told him things were falling apart. He replied with sympathy and then, unexpected event number 9, asked if I wanted to come over. I didn't go. I want credit for that. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted the thread. For the first time since this all started, I actually felt tired. Not guilty, not scared, just exhausted. Meanwhile, my husband packed a small bag and said he was going to stay with a friend for a few days. He said it gently, like he was talking to someone fragile. I told him that felt manipulative. He said, "No, this is me choosing quiet." When the door closed behind him, the house felt enormous and empty, and suddenly very honest. And for the first time, I couldn't lie my way out of the silence. Being alone didn't make me reflective in the noble way people pretend it does. It made me petty first. I checked his location out of habit and then remembered I couldn't anymore. I almost texted him something neutral. "Hope you got there safe," then deleted it because it sounded like I was his mom. I paced. I reorganized the pantry. I drank wine straight from the bottle and told myself it was just one night. Unexpected event number 10. His mother called me. We've always had a polite, surface-level relationship. Holiday texts, birthday cards, that's it. So when I saw her name on my phone, my stomach dropped. I answered with my nicest voice, already planning how much I'd reveal. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She said, "He's hurting," and then paused like she was deciding whether to continue. "He didn't want me to call. I'm calling anyway." I lied instantly, said we were working through things, said it was complicated. She let me talk. Then she said, "He asked me if people can love someone and still not be safe with them." That landed harder than anything he'd said to me directly. After we hung up, I did something I hadn't done yet. I reread old messages between my husband and me. Not the recent tense ones, the old ones. Dumb jokes, plans. The way he used to text me updates about his day. Like I was the default person he shared life with. I'd replace that spot with someone who didn't even know my middle name. I almost messaged Mark again. Instead, I blocked him. For real this time. No mute, no archive. Blocked. It felt dramatic and also weirdly late, like locking the door after the house burned down. That night, I slept on the couch even though I was alone, because the bed felt too much like a lie we'd both been pretending was still intact. I told myself that if my husband came back, I'd do better. Be honest, be patient, be less me. I didn't yet understand that by the time someone leaves for quiet, they've usually already done most of their grieving, and I was about to find that out the hard way. He came back 3 days later, and I knew the second he walked in that this wasn't a reunion. No hug, no relief, just a nod, like we were acknowledging each other in a waiting room. Unexpected event number 11. He brought paperwork, not divorce papers, not yet, but printouts from a mediator, notes from his therapist, and a bullet point list titled Non-Negotiables. I actually laughed when I saw the heading, because of course he'd format heartbreak like a project plan. He didn't smile. He told me he'd spent the weekend replaying the last year of our marriage and realized something that stung more than any insult. I stopped feeling safe telling you the truth before you ever cheated. I tried to argue. I said that was unfair. I said he was rewriting history to justify leaving. He didn't take the bait. He just said, maybe, but it's still how I feel. His non-negotiables were brutal in their simplicity. Full transparency, individual therapy for me, no contact with Mark, verified, not just promised. And the kicker, a 6-month separation while we figured out whether staying married made either of us better people. I snapped. I said separation was just divorce with extra steps. I accused him of punishing me. I told him he was enjoying the power shift, all the greatest hits. He let me finish, then said, I'm not asking you to agree. I'm telling you what I need to stay. That was the first time I realized this wasn't a negotiation. This was an exit ramp with conditions. He asked me, calmly, almost kindly, if I could do it. All of it, no loopholes, no spin. And for the second time in this mess, I hesitated. I said yes anyway, too quickly, too late. He nodded like he'd already accounted for that answer being unreliable. That night, he went back to the guest room. I lay awake listening to the house settle, realizing that even if I followed every rule perfectly, I might still lose him. Not because I failed now, but because I'd already taught him who I was when it mattered most. And that terrified me more than being alone ever had. The separation started immediately, which I hadn't expected. I thought there'd be a grace period, a transition. Nope. He packed methodically, took half the dog stuff, we literally argued over leashes, and moved into a short-term rental across town. He shared the address for emergencies. It felt like being demoted from spouse to liability contact. Unexpected event number 12, the dog stopped eating. I know that sounds dramatic, but it wrecked me. One wouldn't touch her food. The other paced and whined at the door at night. I texted him about it, trying to sound practical instead of emotional, and he replied with tips and vet links like a coworker troubleshooting a shared project. No, I miss them. No, I miss you. Just solutions. I started therapy like I'd promised. First session, the therapist asked why I was there, and I launched into this polished explanation about poor boundaries and unmet needs. She stopped me 10 minutes in and said, "That's a lot of language for avoiding responsibility." I didn't like her immediately. Meanwhile, people started finding out. Not from me, from him, which annoyed me more than it should have. Friends texted awkward check-ins. One of them straight up asked if I'd really cheated, like it was office gossip. I lied out of reflex, said it was more complicated. It's amazing how your mouth keeps doing that even when lying no longer benefits you. Here's the thing no one tells you. Being the villain is lonely in a very specific way. No one asks how you're doing unless they're fishing for remorse. And if you show too much remorse, it feels performative. If you show too little, you're a monster. There's no winning tone. I asked my husband if he wanted to come over for dinner one night. Just dinner, neutral ground. He said, "I don't think that would help either of us right now." That hurt more than if he'd said no outright. Help either of us implied he was already thinking in terms of separate outcomes. I started realizing that the lies weren't just about Mark. They were about control, about keeping doors open, about never fully choosing anything so I wouldn't have to face consequences. And now, with him gone, all the doors felt closed at once. Something shifted around week 3, and it wasn't growth. It was desperation dressed up as clarity. Unexpected event number 13. I ran into my husband by accident, not planned, not orchestrated. I was at the hardware store buying light bulbs I didn't actually need because the house felt too quiet. And there he was at the paint counter, holding sample cards like he was planning a future that didn't include me. I said his name before I could stop myself. He looked surprised, but not happy, just caught. We did the small talk dance, weather, the dogs, logistics. I made a joke about us being that awkward couple everyone stares at, and he didn't laugh. He said he'd rented a place with better light, for reading, for thinking. That word again. I snapped, right there between screws and extension cords. I accused him of already moving on, of enjoying the martyr role, of punishing me by being calm. A store employee slowly backed away like we were about to knock over shelving. He didn't raise his voice. He said, "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself." Then he added quietly, "Those aren't the same thing." That line followed me home like a mosquito I couldn't swat. That night, I did something I hadn't admitted to anyone yet. I unblocked Mark, just to see, just curiosity. He'd already moved on. New profile picture, new girlfriend tagged in comments. No space left for me in that story. I blocked him again, embarrassed at how small I suddenly felt. I realized then that I wasn't mourning my marriage the way my husband was. I was mourning the version of myself who thought she could bend reality without it snapping back. I texted my husband a long message. Apologetic, honest-ish, no excuses. I told him I finally understood how unsafe I'd made him feel. I stared at the screen waiting for the typing bubbles. He replied hours later, "I believe you're starting to understand. I don't know yet what that means for us." That was it. No reassurance, no rejection, just uncertainty. And somehow, that was worse than either. Acceptance doesn't arrive like a breakthrough. It seeps in through irritation. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped rehearsing speeches for conversations that weren't happening. I started noticing how much energy lying had taken, how every version of the truth required maintenance. It was exhausting, carrying all those parallel narratives and pretending they didn't weigh anything. Unexpected event number 14. My therapist asked me a question I couldn't dodge. "If your husband never comes back," she said, "who do you become when no one is watching?" I opened my mouth with something snarky lined up, and then nothing came out. I didn't know. I'd spent so long performing good wife, wronged wife, misunderstood wife, that the idea of being unobserved felt terrifying. My husband and I had our scheduled check-in call that week. Very official, very civil. He told me he was sleeping better, reading again. He said therapy was helping him name patterns he'd ignored for years. I wanted to interrupt, to remind him I wasn't a pattern. I was a person. But I didn't. For once. He asked how therapy was going for me. I told the truth. I said it was uncomfortable, that I was learning how often I used charm or deflection to avoid feeling small. He acknowledged that without praising it, just said, "I'm glad you're doing the work." That was it. No, "I'm proud of you." No, "I miss you." Just acknowledgement. After the call, I cried, not because I'd lost him exactly, but because I finally understood something I'd been resisting. Even if he chose to stay, the marriage we had was already gone. There was no undoing what I'd taught him about me. The best I could do was decide whether I wanted to be someone different going forward, regardless of the outcome. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel the urge to manipulate the ending. I felt tired, honest tired, the kind that comes after you stop running, and that's where things stand now. One more conversation left, one more decision coming. I don't know how it ends, but I know I can't lie my way through it anymore. The last conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon. Neutral timing, neutral tone. That alone told me everything. We met at a cafe halfway between our places, like a custody exchange without the kids. He already had coffee when I arrived. I didn't read into it. I've learned not to do that anymore. He didn't drag it out. That's his way. He said he'd spent the separation trying to imagine coming back, not just physically, but emotionally. And every time he did, his chest tightened. He said trust, for him, wasn't just about fidelity. It was about believing the person next to you wouldn't rewrite reality when things got uncomfortable. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't offer a speech about growth or therapy or how I'd changed. Unexpected event number 15. I let him finish. He said he wasn't angry anymore, that he didn't hate me, that in some ways, that was the problem. "I forgive you," he said, "but I don't want to be married to you." That sentence was calm, final, no dramatic punctuation. I nodded. I even surprised myself by meaning it when I said, "I understand," because I did, not intellectually, not in a "this makes sense" way, in a "this is the cost" way. We talked logistics, mediation, the dogs, who keeps what. He said he hoped I'd keep going to therapy, not for him, but because I deserved to know myself without needing an audience. That stung, because it was kind. When we stood to leave, he hugged me, brief, polite, the kind of hug you give someone you once loved deeply, but no longer want to build a life with. Then he walked away without looking back. So here's the reflection part, since this is supposedly advice-oriented. My husband learned that love isn't enough if safety is gone, that being patient and quiet doesn't protect you from betrayal, and that leaving doesn't always mean you failed. It can mean you finally listened to yourself. If he were writing this post instead of me, he'd probably tell you this: pay attention to the small lies, the ones that come before the big betrayals, and don't confuse forgiveness with obligation. As for me, I learned that lying works until it doesn't. And when it stops working, it takes everything with it. That's it. That's the story.